"This mark isn't human," the Black Maid whispered, and the Vampire King's gaze darkened. It had been 3 centuries since anyone had dared interrupt Aldren Blackveil, mid-council. But Alina Spade's voice, barely louder than silk tearing, cut through the chamber like a blade through ceremony. The candles in the high chamber had a cruel way of flickering, like they were keeping count of every lie told beneath their light. The stained glass windows filtered moonlight into blood-red patterns across the marble floor, painting the assembled lords in shades of violence and divinity. In 300 years, Aldren had learned the rhythms of his court the way ancient sailors learned the moods of the sea, the way Lord Erebos's jaw tightened when territorial disputes arose, the particular scratch of quills on parchment that meant someone was drafting a challenge, the false deference in voices that called him Majesty before attempting a coup. But he had not learned to notice Alina Spade. 6 months she had served in his household, 6 months of pouring wine with hands steady as stone, 6 months of eyes that saw everything, the glyphs carved into door frames, the shimmer of wards. Most vampires had forgotten how to read, the way certain documents hummed with wrongness. She was human. Humans didn't matter in the calculus of immortal politics, until the night she leaned close enough for him to smell lavender soap and fear, and whispered words that stopped his ancient heart. The night of the whisper began with a rolled parchment delivered by hooded courier. A treaty proposal from the Eastern Covens, standard territorial negotiations, or so it appeared. The wax seal gleamed. The calligraphy was flawless. But Alina, refilling his goblet with blood wine, had gone rigid as a corpse, her eyes fixed on the bottom corner of the parchment, on a mark so faint it looked like an ink smudge. To everyone else, it was nothing. To Alina, it screamed. She leaned in, her breath warm against the shell of his ear. "This mark isn't human." 4 words that felt illegal in the sanctity of the chamber. Aldren's gaze darkened, not with anger, but with the cold animal recognition of a predator who just realized he was being hunted. He had accumulated 3 centuries of knowledge, every vampire bloodline's signature, every fey bargain's loophole, every demon's true name. But this mark belonged to none of them. It was a sigil from before the treaties, before the hierarchies, before vampires learned to hide their nature behind boardrooms and political theatre, and he had no idea what it meant. At midnight, after the council adjourned with false smiles and concealed fangs, he summoned Alina to the vault. Lord Erebos stood beside him, arms crossed, expression carved from skepticism. "Show me," Aldren commanded. She pointed without hesitation. "There, the mark pulses. Can't you feel it?" He pulled volumes from locked shelves, grimoires bound in flesh, scrolls, inked in languages that predated Latin. Nothing matched. Alina watched him with those 2 knowing eyes. "You won't find it in your books, Majesty. That mark isn't written. It's carved into the fabric of things, and it's reaching, like roots, trying to find something in you." 3 nights later, Lord Taven collapsed during evening court. His skin turned ash grey. His eyes bled black. He convulsed, clawing at a mark that had appeared on his chest, the same symbol. He whispered one phrase before unconsciousness took him. "It's feeding." Across the room, Alina met Aldren's gaze. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't have to. The vault existed in a part of the estate that predated Aldren's rule, carved into bedrock by hands that had turned to dust centuries before he was born. The air here didn't circulate. It preserved. Every breath tasted of parchment and secrets and the particular silence that accumulates when knowledge is kept from light. Alina descended the spiral stairs behind Aldren, her footsteps echoing his, Lord Erebos bringing up the rear like a disapproving shadow. No one had spoken since Taven was carried from the council chamber, his body convulsing, that unholy mark burned into his chest like a brand. The heavy iron door groaned open. Inside, the vault stretched impossibly far, shelves reaching toward a ceiling lost in darkness. Manuscripts bound in leather that had never come from cattle, scrolls sealed with wax that predated the Roman Empire, artifacts that hummed with residual power, contained behind glass and silver and older protections that had no name. Aldren moved to the central table, a slab of obsidian so black it seemed to absorb light, and spread the parchment across its surface. The mark glowed faintly in the dimness, pulsing like a diseased heartbeat. He didn't look at Alina. "Explain!" His voice was controlled, but she heard the fracture underneath. The vampire king, who had ruled uncontested for 300 years, who had crushed rebellions and negotiated treaties that reshaped the supernatural world, was afraid. "I don't know what it is," Alina said quietly. "Only what it isn't." "That's not an answer." Erebos moved closer, his angular face sharp with suspicion. "You disrupted a royal council, spoke without permission, made claims you cannot substantiate. And now Lord Taven fights for his immortal life because of a mark you noticed and the king did not." The accusation hung between them. "Or did you place it there yourself?" Alina met his stare without flinching. "I didn't create it. I can only see it." "Convenient," Erebos said coldly. "Enough!" Aldren's voice cut through the tension. He finally looked at her, and his eyes were winter itself, pale, merciless, searching. "How long have you had this sensitivity?" "Always." The word came out smaller than she intended. "My mother had it too. She called it the sight, though it's not quite vision. It's more like hearing a sound no one else can hear, feeling a texture that isn't there." "And what do you feel from this?" Aldren gestured to the mark. Alina stepped closer, her pulse loud in her ears. Every instinct screamed not to touch it, but she let her fingers hover an inch above the parchment. The mark pulsed brighter, recognizing her proximity. "Hunger," she whispered. "It's not just a symbol, it's alive, not conscious, but purposeful, like a root system searching for water, except it's searching for—" She looked up at Aldren. "For you, specifically." The king's expression didn't change, but his hand curled into a fist on the table's edge. Erebos had already begun pulling volumes from the shelves, moving with the efficient precision of someone who'd spent centuries cataloguing threats. Leather-bound grimoires thudded onto the table, scrolls unrolled with whispers of ancient languages. He worked in silence, his long fingers tracing indexes and annotations, cross-referencing symbols with the methodical patience of immortal scholarship. Minutes stretched. The only sounds were turning pages and Alina's too human breathing. Finally, Erebos stopped. His finger rested on an illuminated manuscript, the vellum yellow with age. "Here," Aldren leaned over. Alina peered between them. The page showed a symbol that was cousin to the mark on the parchment, not identical, but sharing the same architectural DNA. The text surrounding it was in a language Alina didn't recognize, all harsh consonants and angular script. "Old Thracian," Erebos said, his voice tight, "predates the vampire courts by millennia. This is a binding sigil used by sorcerers before the Schism, when magic was wilder, less codified." He traced the text. "It says these marks were designed to breach wards, to bypass protections granted by bloodline or birthright. In essence," Aldren said slowly, "it negates what I am." "Not negates, feeds upon." Erebos turned the page. The mark acts as a siphon. Once anchored to its target, it draws power continuously. For a human, it would mean death within hours, for one of our kind. Entropy, Aldren finished. The older I am, the more power I possess, the more potent the drain. His jaw tightened. Taven was not the target. He was the test. Alina's blood went cold. They wanted to see if it worked. And now they know it does. Aldren straightened, his expression hardening into something that might have been carved from marble. Which means whoever sent this parchment knows I've seen it, knows I'm aware, and will act quickly before I can mount a defence. Erebos closed the grimoire with deliberate care. Majesty, we should convene the full council, fortify the estate, call in every wardkeeper and blood mage in your territories. No. The word fell like a blade. Aldren's gaze shifted to Alina, and something in his expression had changed. Not softened, nothing about him could soften, but opened, just slightly. The way a fist uncurls before reaching for an unfamiliar weapon. If I convene the council, our enemy will know I'm afraid, will know the mark has power over me, and fear, Lord Erebos, is blood in the water. He turned fully to Alina. You said you can feel this mark. Can you track it? Trace its source? She swallowed hard. I've never tried anything like that. Then you'll learn. It wasn't a request, because right now you are the only advantage I have that our enemy doesn't expect. A human maid who sees what immortals cannot. His voice dropped. You will help me hunt whoever sent this, and in return you will have my protection, my resources, my word that no harm will come to you. Erebos stiffened. Majesty, this is necessary. Aldren's tone brooked no argument. Pride has ruled me for 3 centuries, old friend. It will not rule me into the grave. He extended his hand toward Alina. Not a command, an offering. She looked at his pale palm, at the weight of 300 years behind those storm-grey eyes, at the pulsing mark on the parchment that wanted to devour him. Then she placed her hand in his. His skin was cold as winter stone, but his grip was steady. The investigation began at dawn, though dawn meant nothing in the windowless room Aldren had claimed as their war chamber. It had once been a conservatory, back when the estate hosted mortal guests who needed sunlight. Now the glass was painted black, the garden beds replaced with tables covered in maps, texts, and the parchment that had started everything. Alina sat across from the vampire king, a cup of coffee gone cold in her hands, trying to ignore how surreal it was to be here. 48 hours ago, she'd been invisible. Now she was the only thing standing between Aldren Blackveil and whatever ancient horror wanted to drain him dry. Close your eyes, Aldren instructed, his voice low and surprisingly patient. You said you feel the mark. I need you to feel deeper. She obeyed, her lids sliding shut, the room disappearing into darkness. Her other senses sharpened, the faint rustle of his sleeve as he moved, the mineral scent of old stone, the peculiar absence of a heartbeat from the man sitting 3 feet away. What do you feel? He asked. Nothing yet. Then stop trying. Let it come to you. Alina exhaled slowly, releasing the tension in her shoulders. The fear coiled in her chest. Her mother used to say the sight wasn't about looking. It was about listening to the parts of the world that spoke in frequencies beyond sound. And then, like a radio finding its station, she felt it. A vibration, faint and rhythmic, not coming from the parchment but through it, like the mark was a doorway and something on the other side was breathing. There, she whispered, describe it. It's pulsing, but not from here. It's like an echo, like someone struck a bell miles away and I'm only hearing the reverberation. She frowned, concentrating. It feels old, Not ancient like your books, but old in a different way, like soil, like something that's been buried and is trying to grow. Aldren was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted, darkened. "Can you tell where it's coming from?" Alina reached out without opening her eyes, her fingers hovering over the parchment. The vibration intensified, crawling up her arm like insects beneath skin. She forced herself not to recoil. "North," she breathed. "No, northwest and down, deep down, somewhere cold and—" Her eyes snapped open. "Water! I taste water. Old water. The kind that hasn't seen light in centuries." Aldren's expression was carved from ice. "The catacombs." "What catacombs?" "Beneath the city, pre-Roman construction, expanded during the plague centuries when the dead outnumbered the living." He stood, moving to the largest map on the table, a detailed architectural survey of the city's underbelly. His finger traced a network of tunnels that spread like veins beneath familiar streets. "The old families used them during the purges. My predecessor sealed most of the entrances 200 years ago after a rogue coven tried to use them as a base of operations." "Most?" Alina joined him at the table. 17 known access points remain, all warded, all monitored." His jaw tightened. "Or so I believed." He pulled a smaller map from beneath the others, this one hand-drawn, annotated in cramped script. "These are the deepest sections, flooded chambers connected to the underground river system. No one goes there. Nothing survives there." "Except whoever made this mark," Alina said quietly. Aldren's finger stopped on a section of the map labelled in faded ink, "The Drowned Cathedral." "If you're right about the water, about the depth, this is the only location that fits. It was a church once before the city built over it. Consecrated ground, then desecrated during the Inquisition, then forgotten. The perfect place to hide, or to build power." He looked at her, and for the first time she saw something other than regal control in his expression. Uncertainty. "Consecrated ground weakens my kind. Even desecrated, the residue remains. If our enemy has claimed that space, they've chosen strategically. I cannot go there at full strength." "But I can," Alina said, the realization settling over her like cold water. "I'm human. The ground doesn't care what I am. Which is precisely why I cannot send you. You're not sending me, I'm offering. You would die. We'll both die if we do nothing." She met his stare without flinching. "You said I'm the advantage they don't expect. So use me." Aldren was quiet for a long moment, his ancient eyes searching hers for something she couldn't name. Finally, he reached into his coat and withdrew a slim dagger, the blade black as midnight, the handle wrapped in silver wire. "This is forged from meteorite iron, older than steel, older than most magic in this world. It will cut through wards, through flesh, through things that have no flesh." He placed it on the table between them. "If you are truly going into the dark, you go armed." Alina picked up the blade. It was lighter than she expected, balanced perfectly, the metal cold against her palm. "There's something else you should know," Aldren said, his voice dropping. "The mark on Taven's chest. The healers managed to slow its spread, but they cannot stop it. He has 3 days, perhaps 4. After that, the mark will consume him entirely. And whoever did this will know their weapon works." "Yes." His gaze was iron. "Which means we have 3 days to find them, to end this, or the next mark they send will not be a test." Alina slid the dagger into her belt, feeling its weight settle against her hip like a promise. "Then we'd better not waste time." The entrance to the catacombs was hidden beneath a butcher shop in the old quarter, the kind of establishment that had been grinding the same cuts for 200 years, sawdust perpetually coating the floor, the smell of iron so thick it lived in the walls. The owner, a hunched man with knowing eyes, didn't ask questions when Aldren appeared after midnight. He simply locked the front door, led them through the back room where animal carcasses hung like grim sentinels, and pulled aside a rug to reveal a trapdoor sealed with symbols that made Alina's teeth ache. "It's been quiet down there for decades, Majesty," the butcher said, his voice rough as gravel. "But last week I heard something singing, or maybe chanting, couldn't tell which." "You didn't investigate," Aldren said, not a question. "I'm old, not stupid." The butcher pressed his thumb to the seal. It hissed, releasing. "Whatever's down there now wasn't invited." The ladder descended into absolute darkness, the kind that had weight and texture. Alina went first, Aldren behind her, both of them carrying oil lanterns that pushed back the black in flickering circles. The air grew colder with each rung, damper, tasting of minerals and rot and something else, something that made the sight in Alina's chest vibrate like a struck tuning fork. They reached bottom. The tunnel stretched in both directions, walls slick with moisture, the ceiling low enough that Aldren had to duck. Ancient symbols were carved into the stone, worn smooth by time and water, their original purpose lost. "This way," Alina whispered, though she didn't know how she knew. The mark's echo was stronger here, a magnetic pull in her sternum dragging her northwest. They walked in silence, their footsteps splashing through shallow pools, the lantern light dancing across walls that wept condensation. The tunnel branched again. Alina chose each turn by instinct, following the sensation that grew stronger with every step until her skin felt electrified, every hair standing on end. That's when they found the first body. It was slumped against the wall, partially submerged in water that had turned rust red. Male, vampire, judging by the pallor and the elongated canines visible through slack lips. His chest was carved open, ribs spread like wings, and there, burned into the pale flesh of his sternum, was the mark. But this version was complete, fully realized. The symbol on the parchment had been a seed. This was the flower. "Lord Casimir," Aldren said quietly, kneeling beside the body. "He left the council meeting early, said he had business in the northern wards." His jaw tightened. "I should have questioned it." Alina forced herself to look closer. The mark wasn't just burned into the flesh, it was moving. Hairline tendrils of black spread from its centre like frost on glass, crawling beneath the skin, mapping the network of veins with methodical precision. "It's feeding," she breathed, "even now, even after death." Aldren's hand hovered over the mark, not quite touching. "This is what awaits Tavin, what awaits me, if we fail." A sound echoed from deeper in the tunnel. Not singing, not chanting, laughter, low and wet and profoundly wrong. Aldren rose in one fluid motion, his hand moving to the sword at his hip. "Stay behind me." But Alina was already moving forward, drawn by the pull in her chest that had become almost painful. The tunnel opened into a chamber, and her breath caught. The drowned cathedral. It must have been magnificent once. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadow. Columns thick as ancient trees rose from standing water that covered the floor knee-deep. The remains of pews jutted from the water like the ribs of a shipwreck, and at the far end, where the altar should have been, someone had built something new. A circle, drawn in what looked like liquid silver, except silver didn't glow with sickly green luminescence. Symbols covered every surface, the walls, the columns, even the water itself, somehow burned into the surface tension. And at the centre of the circle stood a figure. They wore robes that might have been white once, but were now stained with substances Alina didn't want to identify. Their face was hidden behind a mask of hammered copper, featureless except for 2 eye holes that reflected the lantern light like an animal's. "The king comes to the depths," the figure said, their voice resonant, neither male nor female. "How the mighty have fallen, literally." Aldren stepped into the water, sword drawn, his presence filling the space with ancient authority. "You attack my people, brand them with forbidden magic. For what? Power? Revenge? For balance." The figure moved their hands in a fluid gesture, and the symbols on the walls pulsed brighter. "Your kind has ruled too long, Blackveil, grown fat on treaties and hierarchies. You've forgotten what you are, what you were, predators playing at politics, monsters in boardrooms. And you would remedy this by murdering us? Not murder, reclamation." The figure's hand swept toward Casmir's direction. "The old magic requires sacrifice, requires a return to the natural order. Your bloodline is the oldest, king, your power the deepest. When I drain you, when I consume what centuries have built, I will remake the world as it should be, wild, honest, free." Alina felt the meteorite dagger cold against her palm. The mark's pull was overwhelming now, making her dizzy, her vision greying at the edges. And then she understood. "You're not draining him for power," she said, her voice cutting through the chamber. "You're draining him because you're dying." The figure went very still. "The marks on the walls," Alina continued, pieces falling into place, "they're not just ritual components, they're life support. You're burning through energy faster than you can gather it. That's why Casmir. Why the test on Taven? You're desperate." Beneath the mask, something shifted. When the figure spoke again, their voice had changed, become ragged. "Clever little human. The king chooses his pets well." "She's not a pet," Aldren said quietly, and there was death in his tone. "She's my ally, and you've made a grave miscalculation." "Have I?" The figure raised both hands. The symbols blazed. The water began to churn. "You stand in consecrated ground, weakened, with only a human girl and a sword forged before you were born. While I have prepared this space for months, every marker anchor, every symbol a weapon, you cannot win here, Blackveil." The water erupted. Forms rose from the depths, bodies, corpses, things that had been dead so long they'd forgotten what life looked like. Their eyes glowed with the same sickly green as the symbols, their movements jerky and wrong, puppets on invisible strings, and all of them wore the mark. "Run!" Aldren commanded, shoving Alina backward even as he met the first wave with his blade. But Alina's feet were rooted, because the sight was showing her something the vampire king couldn't see. The marks on all these bodies, on the walls, on the water, they were connected. A network, a web with the figure at its centre, pulling power through every strand. Cut the spider. Collapse the web. She gripped the meteorite dagger tighter and dove into the water. The water was colder than death and tasted of centuries. Alina plunged beneath the surface, the sounds of combat muffled to dull thuds and the wet crunch of steel meeting bone. Above her, through rippling darkness, she saw the flash of Aldren's blade, the lurching forms of the reanimated dead, the green glow of corrupted magic painting everything in nightmare shades. But down here, submerged, the sight opened differently. The marks weren't just on the walls. They were woven through the water itself, threads of sickly luminescence connecting corpse to corpse, symbol to symbol, all of them feeding into the central circle where the masked figure stood. The network pulsed like a living thing, each beat drawing power from Aldren's weakened state, from the consecrated ground, from the death that saturated this forsaken place. Alina's lungs began to burn. She kicked toward the altar, toward the thickest concentration of threads, the meteorite dagger heavy in her grip. The figure hadn't seen her dive. Their attention was fixed on Aldren, on the spectacle of the ancient king struggling against an army of the profaned dead. Her fingers found the edge of the silver circle. The metal burned at her touch, not with heat, but with wrongness, every cell in her body screaming to pull away. She ignored it, pressed the dagger's edge against the nearest thread. The blade cut through like the strand was made of smoke. The entire network convulsed. Above water she heard the masked figure scream, not in pain, but in rage. "The human! Kill the human!" Alina surfaced gasping, just as 3 corpses changed direction, their glowing eyes fixing on her with terrible purpose. She didn't have time to run. The first one reached her with hands that were more bone than flesh, fingers closing around her throat with strength that shouldn't exist in a dead thing. Then Aldren was there, his blade taking the creature's head in one clean stroke. The body collapsed, but 2 more were already rising from the water, and beyond them 12 more lurched forward. "The circle!" Alina choked out. "The marks are connected. I can break them." "Then break them!" Aldren put himself between her and the advancing corpses, his movements a blur of lethal precision. But she could see what he couldn't. Each corpse he destroyed weakened him further. The consecrated ground, the sheer number of enemies, the sustained exertion. He was slowing, fractionally, inevitably. They had minutes, maybe less. Alina dove again, ignoring the hands that grabbed at her ankles, trusting Aldren to keep them at bay. Underwater she swam along the circle's perimeter, cutting thread after thread. Each severed connection sent shockwaves through the network, the green luminescence flickering, dimming, but the figure was adapting. New threads grew to replace the severed ones, spawning from the marks on the walls, weaving themselves back into the web with desperate speed. Alina could feel the sorcerer's will behind it, frantic and furious, pouring energy into maintaining the structure. She burst up for air, her vision swimming. "It's regenerating too fast. I can't. The anchor!" Aldren's voice was strained. He had a corpse pinned against a pillar, his sword through its chest, but more were closing in. "Every spell has an anchor. Find it and destroy it." The anchor! Alina's eyes swept the chamber, using the sight, looking past the obvious symbols to the deeper structure beneath. There, at the base of the ruined altar, submerged in water gone black with dissolved centuries, something pulsed with a rhythm different from the rest, older, darker, the heartbeat beneath the heartbeat. She filled her lungs and dove deeper than before, kicking down through water thick with sediment and worse things. The darkness was absolute. She navigated by the pull in her chest that had led her this far, by the desperate certainty that if she didn't reach the anchor in the next 30 seconds, they would both die in this drowned cathedral. Her fingers found stone, carved stone. She traced the grooves, recognizing the pattern, the complete version of the mark, the original from which all others descended. It was carved deep into the altar's foundation, and embedded in its centre was something that felt like glass but pulsed, warm as flesh. A soul gem. The revelation hit her with sick clarity. The sorcerer wasn't just feeding on stolen power. They'd bound their own soul to this place, tethering themselves to the magic through the most forbidden form of necromancy. That's why they were dying. That's why they needed Aldren's ancient vitality. The gem was cracked, its containment failing, the soul inside burning through its vessel like acid through paper. Alina pressed the meteorite dagger against the gem. Above her, muffled by water, she heard the scream, felt the network convulse. The sorcerer knew what she'd found, knew what she was about to do. Every corpse in the chamber turned toward her location. She didn't have time to surface, didn't have time to breathe. Aldren was shouting something she couldn't hear through the water, and her pulse thundering in her ears. Alina drove the blade down. The gem shattered. The explosion of released energy threw her backward, tumbling through water that had turned searingly hot, her body ragdoll loose, consciousness flickering. Somewhere distant she heard screaming, the sorcerer's voice splitting into multiple registers, harmonizing with agony as 300 years of stolen life came due all at once. The green light died. The corpses collapsed like puppets with cut strings. The marks on the walls blackened and flaked away like burned paper. And Alina sank, the dagger falling from nerveless fingers, her lungs empty, the water pulling her down into the dark that waited beneath the drowned cathedral. She didn't feel the hands that caught her, didn't feel the surge of movement as Aldren kicked toward the surface, her body pressed against his chest, his arm like iron around her ribs. Didn't feel the air when they broke through, or the desperate pressure of his hands on her sternum, forcing water from her lungs, forcing breath back into her body. She only felt the cold, the all-consuming cold of having touched something that was never meant to be touched, of having broken something that couldn't be unbroken. "Breathe," Aldren commanded, his voice raw with something that might have been fear in a creature capable of such an emotion. "Damn you, human! Breathe!" Alina's body obeyed before her mind could. She convulsed, water pouring from her mouth, her lungs burning as air rushed back in. She gasped, choked, gasped again, each breath a knife of sensation. When her vision cleared, she was on the stone steps leading up from the water, Aldren kneeling beside her, his perfect composure shattered. His white hair was plastered to his skull, his clothes were ruined, and his eyes, those ancient, pitiless eyes, held something she'd never expected to see there, relief. "The sorcerer," she managed. Aldren's gaze shifted to the centre of the chamber. Where the masked figure had stood, there was only ash. The robes had collapsed into themselves, empty. The copper mask lay half submerged, its surface cracked, the eye holes dark. "Gone," he said quietly. "You destroyed the anchor. Without it, the soul had nothing to cling to." He looked back at her. "You killed them." A human maid killed a sorcerer powerful enough to threaten the oldest vampire bloodline in existence. "I had a good teacher," Alina whispered, then coughed up more water. For a moment, just a heartbeat, Aldren Blackveil smiled. It was a small thing, barely a curve at the corner of his mouth, but it transformed his face into something almost human. Then he lifted her as easily as one might lift a child, cradling her against his chest. "We're leaving, now, before this place decides to collapse on principle." They emerged from the butcher shop as the first light of dawn turned the eastern sky from black to charcoal. Aldren moved quickly through the emptying streets, Alina still cradled against his chest, her body racked with shivers that wouldn't stop. The meteorite dagger was back at her belt. He'd retrieved it from the cathedral floor before they fled, refusing to leave such a weapon behind. The estate loomed ahead, its Gothic silhouette stark against the lightening sky. Servants scattered as Aldren strode through the entrance, his clothes still dripping water and worse things, his expression carved from ice. He didn't stop until he reached his private chambers, kicking the door shut behind them and lowering Alina onto the settee near the fireplace. "Don't move," he commanded, already igniting the fire with a gesture that sent flames roaring to life. The room flooded with warmth and light, revealing the full damage of their descent. Alina's clothes were shredded, her skin marked with bruises that were already blooming purple and black. Her hands trembled uncontrollably, still locked in the shape of gripping the dagger. Aldren disappeared into an adjoining room and returned with blankets, a decanter of amber liquid, and something that looked disturbingly like a medical kit from another century. He wrapped the blankets around her shoulders, pressed a glass of what turned out to be brandy into her shaking hands. "Drink," he ordered. She obeyed. The liquid burned down her throat, settled in her stomach like molten gold, and slowly, so slowly, the trembling began to ease. Aldren knelt before her, his eyes level with hers, no longer the untouchable king, but something closer to human concern. "You touched a soul gem, a corrupted one. The residue will take time to leave your system." His fingers were gentle as they checked her pulse, examined the bruises on her throat where the corpse had grabbed her. "You should be dead 3 times over. The drowning, the backlash from shattering the anchor, the simple fact of being human in that much concentrated dark magic." "But I'm not," Alina said, her voice rough as gravel. "No, you're not." He sat back on his heels, something like wonder crossing his features. "Your sensitivity to the marks, it protected you somehow, like a vaccination. You've been exposed to low-level arcane corruption your entire life, built up a tolerance most humans could never survive acquiring." "Lucky me." "Extremely." He stood, moved to his desk, and returned with the parchment, the original document that had started everything. In the firelight, the mark was barely visible now, faded to almost nothing. "The network is broken. Every mark connected to the sorcerer's anchor is dissolving. I received word before we left the catacombs. Lord Taven woke an hour ago. The mark on his chest is gone. He'll recover fully." Relief flooded through Alina so powerfully her eyes stung. "Then it's over." "The immediate threat, yes," Aldren set the parchment aside. "But the implications—" He paced to the window, staring out at his domain with eyes that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. "I ruled for 3 centuries on the assumption that age equals wisdom. That ancient power is the only power that matters. And a human girl with a gift she didn't ask for proved me catastrophically wrong. You're not going to kill me for it, are you?" He turned, and that almost smile flickered across his face again. "Quite the opposite." He moved back to where she sat, his expression serious. "The council will convene at sunset. Lord Erebos has already demanded a full accounting. They'll want to know how the sorcerer penetrated our wards, how they acquired forbidden knowledge, how they nearly destroyed one of the oldest among us." "And what will you tell them?" "The truth." His gaze was steady. "That I was blind. That tradition made me arrogant. That I nearly led us all to ruin because I refused to see threats that didn't fit my understanding of the world." He paused. "And that a maid named Alina Spade saved not just my life, but the integrity of our entire line." Alina's breath caught. "They'll never accept that. They'll have no choice. I'm still king." The steel returned to his voice. "And as king, I'm making changes, starting with you." He crossed to his desk, withdrew a scroll of heavy parchment, and began writing in swift, elegant script. When he finished, he pressed his signet ring into hot wax, sealing the document with the Blackveil crest. "What is that?" Alina asked. "Your new commission." He brought it to her, placing it in her still trembling hands. "As of tonight, you are no longer a maid. You are hereby appointed Keeper of Wards and Arcane Council to the Vampire King. You will have chambers in the East Wing, a seat at my table, access to the vault and all resources therein, and the authority to investigate, question, and act on any magical threat to this household." Alina stared at the document, at the formal language that transformed her from invisible servant to irreplaceable advisor. "I don't I'm not qualified for this. You destroyed a centuries-old sorcerer in single combat while drowning. I'd say you're overqualified." His tone softened. "You saved my life, Alina. More than that, you showed me that survival requires adaptation, that new threats demand new guardians. I need someone who sees what I cannot, who moves through the world differently than creatures who've forgotten what it means to be mortal. What about Erebos, the council? They'll see this as an insult." "Let them." Aldren's eyes flashed with ancient authority. "I've spent 300 years maintaining their comfort, their certainty. It nearly killed us all. If my reign is to mean anything beyond mere survival, it must evolve. And evolution, Alina, begins with uncomfortable truths." She looked down at the parchment, at her name written in his precise hand. Alina Spade, Keeper of Wards. It felt impossible, absurd, like a fever dream born from drowning. "I accept," she heard herself say. "Good." Aldren extended his hand, the same gesture he'd made in the vault before everything changed. "Then welcome to your new life, Keeper. It will be far more dangerous than your old one." Alina took his hand, felt the cold strength of his grip, the weight of centuries behind it. "I survived the drowned cathedral. I think I can handle a council of grumpy vampires." This time his smile was genuine, brief but real. "Your optimism is refreshing, misguided but refreshing." Outside, the sun cleared the horizon, flooding the city with light that would never touch this room. But inside, by firelight and candlelight and the glow of a friendship forged in dark water and darker magic, something new had begun. The old order was changing. And Alina Spade, orphan's daughter and cathedral cleaner's child, sat at its centre, wrapped in blankets that smelled of winter and age, holding a commission that made her equal to lords who'd walked the earth for centuries. Tomorrow the council would object, would scheme, would test her. But tonight she was simply alive, simply warm, simply seen. And for the first time in her careful, invisible life, that was enough. The council chamber felt different when Alina entered it as something other than a servant. The same stained glass windows, the same marble floors, the same ancient lords arranged around the obsidian table. But now there was a chair for her, placed deliberately at Aldren's right hand, where Lord Erebos had sat for 2 centuries. Erebos now stood behind his relocated seat, his expression a careful mask of neutrality that didn't quite hide the fury burning beneath. The other council members watched her approach with varying degrees of curiosity, disdain, and calculation. Lady Mortaine's eyes tracked her like a predator assessing prey. Lord Verin's lips curled in barely concealed contempt. Only Lord Tavin, still pale from his ordeal but alive, met her gaze with something approaching gratitude. Aldren stood at the head of the table, his presence filling the room with 3 centuries of accumulated authority. He wore fresh clothes, a black suit that might have been tailored yesterday or 100 years ago, his white hair pulled back, every inch, the immortal king. The only sign of their recent battle was a faint scar on his left hand, already fading. "We are gathered," he began, his voice carrying the weight of ritual, "to address the attack on our house, an attack that nearly succeeded, that claimed Lord Casmir's life, and would have claimed Lord Tavin's had we not acted swiftly." "We?" Erebos's voice cut through the formality like a blade. "Forgive me, Majesty, but the report you circulated speaks of actions taken without council approval, of descending into forbidden territories with only a human servant as companion, of engaging an enemy whose capabilities you had not assessed. This is not how we have governed for 300 years. "No," Aldren agreed calmly, "it is not. which is precisely why we nearly fell." Silence crashed through the chamber. "Our traditions," Aldren continued, "are built on the assumption that age equals wisdom, that what has worked before will work again, that threats will always come from predictable sources, rival covens, rogue fae, territorial disputes. We were wrong." He placed both hands on the table. "The sorcerer who attacked us used magic that predated our courts, magic none of us recognized because we've spent centuries studying each other and forgetting there are older, darker things in this world. And you believe a human girl can protect us from such threats?" Mortaine's voice dripped skepticism. "I believe she already has." Aldren gestured to Alina. "While we debated protocol, she identified the danger. While we consulted ancient texts, she tracked it to its source. And while I fought the sorcerer's reanimated army, she destroyed the sole anchor that powered the entire network. Alone, underwater, at risk of her own life." "She is untrained," Varen protested, "undisciplined. She has no understanding of our ways, our hierarchies." "Our hierarchies nearly killed us," Aldren interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "I will not apologize for valuing effectiveness over tradition. Alina Spade is now Keeper of Wards. She has my full confidence and authority. Any who wish to challenge this decision may do so. Formally. Now." The threat hung in the air like a drawn blade. Challenging a king's decree meant ritual combat. None of them were foolish enough to face Aldren in single combat, especially not over a human appointment. Erevos was the first to speak, his tone measured. "Majesty, no one questions your right to appoint whom you choose, but perhaps a probationary period? A test of her capabilities before granting full authority?" Aldren's eyes narrowed. "She destroyed a sorcerer powerful enough to breach wards that have stood for centuries. What further test would satisfy you?" "One that doesn't involve nearly dying," Taven said quietly, and several heads turned. He met Aldren's gaze steadily. "The Keeper saved my life. I won't dispute her courage or her gift. But Lord Erevos has a point. She's been thrust into a role she didn't train for. Perhaps we owe her the support of proper education before sending her into the next crisis." It was a diplomatic compromise, and Alina recognized it for what it was, a way for the council to save face while accepting the inevitable. Aldren looked at her, the question clear in his eyes. "Your choice." Alina stood, feeling every gaze in the room fix on her. "I accept Lord Taven's proposal. I have knowledge the council lacks, but you have centuries of experience I need. Teach me your ways, and I'll show you how to see the threats you've been missing. We learn from each other, or we die separately." Mortaine's expression shifted, something like respect flickering across her features. Varen looked less convinced, but he nodded grudgingly. Erevos remained still as carved stone. "Then it's settled," Aldren said. "The Keeper will undergo formal training in our protocols while maintaining her investigative authority. Lord Erevos, you will oversee her education personally." Erevos's jaw tightened. "Majesty." "You are the most knowledgeable among us," Aldren continued smoothly, "and the most sceptical. If anyone can properly assess her capabilities, it's you, unless you doubt your own teaching abilities." Trapped by his own reputation, Erevos inclined his head stiffly. "As you command." Aldren's smile was sharp as winter. "Good. Then we have much work ahead. The sorcerer is dead, but their attack revealed weaknesses in our defences. We will address them, all of them, beginning tonight." He looked around the table, meeting each lord's eyes in turn. "The world is changing. We change with it, or we join the dust of empires that refuse to adapt. I know which I choose." 3 months later, Alina stood in her chambers in the East Wing, watching the city lights flicker through the Gothic windows. The room still felt impossibly grand. Mahogany furniture that predated nations, shelves lined with grimoires she was slowly learning to read, a desk covered in maps and documents marked with her own annotations, a far cry from the servants' quarters where she'd slept 6 months ago, counting coins and hoping to remain invisible. The meteorite dagger rested on her desk, cleaned and sharpened, a reminder of the night everything changed. Beside it lay her latest report, an analysis of the city's ward network, identifying 17 weak points she'd discovered using the site. Erebos had reviewed it yesterday, his commentary terse but lacking the condescension of their early sessions. High praise. From him. The door opened without knocking. Only one person had that privilege. Aldren entered carrying a sealed envelope embossed with unfamiliar symbols. The Northern Territories sent this. Their wards are failing. Systematic degradation over the past 6 weeks. They're requesting your expertise. Alina took the envelope, breaking the seal. They're requesting me specifically. Word travels? A hint of amusement coloured his voice. The human keeper who killed a soul-bound sorcerer has become something of a legend. Several houses have inquired about borrowing your services. And you said? That you're not a sword for hire. He moved to the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. But I also recognise that this work extends beyond my territory. The sorcerer we faced was symptom, not disease. There are more out there, more forgotten magics being rediscovered, more threats that don't respect our careful hierarchies. Alina joined him at the window. You want me to go? I want you to choose. He turned to face her. You've fulfilled every obligation, proven yourself to the council. Even Erebos admits grudgingly that you're competent. You could remain here, maintain our wards, live comfortably under my protection, or you could become something else, a bridge between the old world and the new, someone who sees what others miss, wherever that sight is needed. She thought of the drowned cathedral, of Taven's grateful eyes, of the weak points in the city's defences that no one else had noticed. The site wasn't just a gift, it was a responsibility. If I go, I'll need resources, support, and autonomy to act without waiting for council approval. Done. No hesitation. You'll have access to my network, my authority to requisition aid, and a standing invitation to return whenever you choose. Alina looked at the sealed letter, at the plea for help from strangers who believed she could save them. 6 months ago she'd been running from a prison of her own powerlessness. Now she had the chance to prevent others from facing the same darkness that had nearly consumed them all. I'll leave at week's end, she said, after I finish fortifying the eastern wards. Aldren extended his hand as he had twice before. Then go with my blessing, Keeper, and come back with stories that will terrify the council appropriately. She took his hand, surprised as always by its coldness, its strength. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. You were never invisible, Alina Spade. I was simply blind. His grip tightened briefly before releasing. Don't get yourself killed. I'd hate to train another keeper from scratch. She smiled. I survived you and Erebos. I think I can handle whatever's out there. Your optimism remains misguided, he said, but his eyes held warmth. I'm counting on it. After he left, Alina returned to the window, watching dawn approach. The vampire king would retreat to his lightless chambers soon. But she could stand here and greet the sun, human and alive and chosen for exactly that reason. The mark on the parchment had been destroyed, but the mark it left on both their lives, the recognition that true strength came from unexpected places, would endure far longer than any spell. She had been a maid who whispered a warning. Now she was a keeper who would reshape what it meant to protect the ancient from the new. The world was changing, and Alina Spade would change with it, and when she whispered now, the whole world would listen.